Okay, this video is quotes of Victor Hugo. Now, Victor Hugo was born to, his father was a general in the army with Napoleon. So his family was prestigious in France, looked up to. Victor Hugo was a literary genius. He was already writing good poems, writing great novels. He wrote The Hunchback of Notre Dame when he was only 28 years old, kind of like a literary prodigy. He was writing plays, essays. He was great at it. So in many ways, Victor Hugo was a great literary genius, okay? Now, we'll talk about each of these, and then we'll start getting into his quotes. The high point of his literary career, though, by far, is the book Les Miserables. Les Miserables is one of the all-time greatest novels of all time. I would probably rank it second. The greatest of all time is Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens, then Les Miserables by Victor Hugo, then Brothers Karamazov by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Okay, and then I would probably say Quo Vadis by Henry Sienkiewicz is the fourth best novel. Okay, maybe Tale of Two Cities by Dickens is the fifth best novel of all time. And here's the great scene, the best scene in the whole movie, in the whole book, Les Miserables, is when the bishop forgives Jean Valjean. Jean Valjean had been a convict who'd finally gotten out, and the bishop was kind enough to let him stay at his place overnight, and Jean Valjean had robbed him. And now he had been caught by the French police, and they were bringing Jean Valjean back to the bishop to confirm that he was guilty. Valjean said that the bishop had given it to him. And the bishop said, "Oh yes, I gave these to you, and I also forgot to take these candlesticks I give you." Valjean had stolen some silverware. It's also like one of the best songs in the whole musical, Jean Valjean Forgiven by the bishop. And I can't really give it the credit it deserves. It's so magnificent. It's like, it's about as good as anything in the Bible, okay? It's an extraordinary story, of true love, okay? Like the Ruth and Naomi story, okay? It's just incredible. You should see it. The book's worth it for this scene, okay? And the book is real long here. I'll talk some more about Victor Hugo, then I'll get back to Les Miserables. Victor Hugo carried a sketchbook in his pocket. Here it is. And he would always write little notes, little sentences, paragraphs that he wanted to put in the book, little drawings of things he wanted to use in a book, characters, and then what he'd do is he'd make a line through it once he'd added that to his next upcoming novel. And that's a great thing for anybody to do. You'll notice if you study a lot of the great writers that this is a typical thing that they do. And because you're always learning a little something each day, and as a writer in particular, you're looking for material that you can at some place in the future incorporate it into some type of presentation, a novel, an essay, whatever it might be. Plus you want to keep track of all that you're learning, so because you're going to keep accumulating information, and unless you have a way to keep track of it, writing down is the best way. That way you retain it. So this is characteristic. Stevenson, the writer, would also do this too. It's a typical thing to do, and it makes sense. You should have a notebook by your bed, so when you first wake up in the morning, or in your desk, in your house, your apartment, you write down whatever good idea you had, whatever you learned during the day, write it down, and then organize the material so you keep on building. It's called a knowledge management system. So he wrote The Hunchback of Notre Dame when he was only about 28 years of age, and it was a magnificent novel, and it sort of harkened back to the Middle Ages. This is Romanticism, sort of like in the height of Romanticism. And Romanticism harkened back to the Middle Ages and Christianity, Catholicism, versus the Enlightenment sort of harkened back, if you will, to classicism, to the ancient Greeks and ancient Romans. Okay, and this is Quasimodo, who rang the bell tower in Notre Dame, and that's Esmeralda, the beautiful gypsy girl who was treated unfairly by Claude Frodo, especially after she rejected his love, the deacon. It's great, and it's still, though, it's a little bit of the primitive romantic side. The characters aren't that fully developed as they would be in Les Mis. Okay, and it's a little bit reminiscent of a Walter Scott novel, something like Ivanhoe or something. Bravery and goodness and bipolar opposites, okay? He's a bit of the grotesque, but he's got a heart of gold, Quasimodo. And Esmeralda, of course, is the beautiful, okay? And these opposites, they're quite... And I remember the most extraordinary scene in the whole book, I thought, was, besides the stuff with Quasimodo and Frodo, I love the scene with Esmeralda and her mother. It was so emotionally perfect. Okay, then his great big book, of course, is Les Miserables, and it relates a lot to his life. There was the big revolution in France in 1848, and Victor Hugo was closely related to that event. He had come up, down the pike of being wealthy, a member of the establishment. He was already, you know, the highest people in France loved him when he was a young man already. So he was prominent and wealthy from, early middle age. And that's going to have a factor. And he started becoming disillusioned with the rulers in France, and he saw how brutal they were to the poor, how unfair things were to the poor. The poor weren't even allowed to vote. And this is a painting of the revolution in 1848 in France, painted by Horace Vernet in the streets. They had all these barricades. Okay, and Victor Hugo himself, then Napoleon III had taken over, and he had actually helped to get Napoleon III into power, but he became pissed off when Napoleon III was so brutal to the poor people, the peasants, and many of them were deported or executed, and Victor Hugo fought a lot himself to try to protect the peasants from being executed and deported. And in a sense, Jean Valjean is reminiscent and symbolizes how Victor Hugo said a lot of these people are good people, give them a chance to have a good life. Because Jean Valjean was like his greatest character ever. We'll come to that in a moment. Victor Hugo himself, with Napoleon III's rule in France, went into exile for 19 years on one island called Jersey, another called Guernsey. And he had all these photographs taken, and he sort of represented himself in exile, was reminiscent of France. And he said that which Napoleon III has exiled from France is France itself, meaning that he himself was like France. And it reminds one of, like, this is in the 1800s and the 1700s. Voltaire had been exiled for a while, for example, to England. And later in the 1900s, de Gaulle would be exiled, so to speak, to London. Okay. He repeatedly wrote a lot of essays criticizing Napoleon III, and he sort of had come to see a republican version of government as the future for France, rather than monarchy. He had previously, of course, been a monarchist when he was young, Bourbon. Okay, here is the big version of Les Mis. It's like 1,200 pages. They had triple-decker novels in the past. Like they would be, a novel this long would be in 3 parts. That way the library could rent out the 3 parts separately, potentially make a little more money. And people would read these 1,200-page novels. What I did to read Victor Hugo, Les Miserables, and Notre Dame, I just listened to them both on audio CD. I would listen to audio cassette books in my house back in the old days, and I listened to audio CDs in the car. But it's a very pleasant, enjoyable way to get through these big novels. Okay. Gone with the Wind is another masterpiece, written by a woman. The best novel ever written by a woman. The other one would be Atlas Shrugged, written by Ayn Rand. And Ayn Rand would say, Victor Hugo is the greatest novelist of all time. He's magnificent. And he really is. Les Mis is an incredible book. Notre Dame is a very good book, but Les Mis is an incredible book. Some of the best songs. This is the best version of the soundtracks. I watched multiple versions of the movie. This is the best of the soundtracks. I actually went and saw it when it was in my city. Okay, here is The Red and the Black's a great song. I Dreamed a Dream, the one of Fantine. Jean Valjean, Forgiven by the Bishop. Those are the best three songs. There's other great songs. It's a magnificent, one of the all-time greatest soundtracks of all time. Here's Victor Hugo when he was an older man, and this is what most people remember him of. Okay, let's go to the next picture here. Here is my favorite version of the movies. I really like the one with Depardieu. He just was a great Jean Valjean. Jean Valjean was strong and brave and good. And Depardieu, he's French, man. He played it perfectly. Here was, I'm going to go through Hugo's quotes at the end. I just wanted to give you the backstory. Here was his funeral. There was giant funeral. He had become the man of letters in France. He was a national hero. He died at 83 years of age, which was in 1885 because he'd been born in 1802. Okay, let's go through some of his quotes. Let's see. Nietzsche said, Victor Hugo was a lighthouse in a sea of absurdity. Jean Cocteau said, Hugo was a madman who believed he was Hugo. Yeah, he had this giant ego, but a lot of times people with giant egos are the ones who are the biggest achievers. And their ego makes them more resilient in their religion. Victor Hugo quote, laughter is sunshine. It chases winter from the human face. Okay, Hugo's quotes. People do not lack strength. They lack will. Yeah, you got to focus your energy on 1 or 2 things if you want to be great. Perseverance is the secret of all triumphs. A little bit each day gets the way. 40 is the old age of youth. 50 is the youth of old age. In order to be free, you must be able to endure poverty like him in exile. When a woman is talking to you, listen to what she says with her eyes. Yeah, women make all these little facial gestures that men don't. Victor Hugo, a little girl without a doll is almost as unfortunate as a woman, as a grown-up woman without children. Truth and indignation is the most eloquent speaker. When I speak to you about myself, I am speaking to you about yourself. How is it that you don't see that? Okay, this is someone describing the French Romantic style. It was described as a juxtaposition of the sublime, the beautiful, the grotesque, and the monstrous. In The Hunchback of Notre Dame, the cathedral was sublime. Esmeralda was the beautiful. Quasimodo was grotesque. And Claude Frollo was monstrous, the evil deacon in that one. In Les Mis, Monsieur Bienvenue and Jean Valjean. So Monsieur Bienvenue was the bishop. He was magnificent, sublime. And so was Jean Valjean. Cosette was the beautiful, the daughter of Fantine. Thénardier was the grotesque. He was the innkeeper who was a sneaky criminal bastard. Okay, Javert was the monster. He was so unreasonable. But he was true to his own personal convictions. Les Mis, said Hugo, is about the movement from evil to good, from darkness to light. And that's true too. You see, Jean Valjean is so great, such a wonderful hero. Okay, now I'm going to share with you, there's also a dark side to Hugo, and just so you know about it a little bit, Hugo, in the chapter on creators, Paul Johnson described him as a genius without a brain. So he was this magnificent writer. Emotionally, his sense of literature and right and wrong in his book was perfect, okay? Les Mis is a perfect novel, okay? But why would this be said of him by Paul Johnson? In his own life, he at many times was a bit of a jerk. He was married at 20 years of age, and then 10 years later he had a lifelong mistress, Juliette Drouet. He had other affairs in an irresponsible way. One thing about him as a writer, he got up first thing in the morning and started writing, and that's what most geniuses do. They do their academic work first thing in the morning. Let's see. He died in 1885. He was buried in the Pantheon for all the literary gods and other great men. He was like the literary man of France of all time. After him would be Voltaire. For England, there's Shakespeare, and then Charles Dickens was contemporary with Hugo. And they're really similar in many ways. They both spoke up for the poor, for the downtrodden man. I think Dickens put out more great books. Christmas Carol, A Tale of Two Cities, and a lot of other works. Oliver Twist, David Copperfield. Fyodor Dostoevsky, we talked about him. France, Italy, Carlo Collodi and Pinocchio. Germany, Goethe with Sorrows of Young Werther and Faust. Another good book by Hugo. Well, many felt it was good. I actually didn't read this one, but I heard a lot of good things about it. It was 93. I read Notre Dame and Les Mis. Okay, Ayn Rand on Victor Hugo. She said he's the greatest novelist of all time was Victor Hugo. She said discovering Victor Hugo was the greatest literary experience I ever had. The sense of life that he communicated, the grandeur of men was so high above anything I had ever encountered before in other books. To this day, I owe an enormous debt of gratitude to Victor Hugo. It is from him I learned the art of the romantic novel. Okay. Now here's one of the lines when the bishop says to Jean Valjean when he forgives him, Jean Valjean, my brother, you no longer belong to evil, but to good. It is your soul that I am buying for you. I am withdrawing it from dark thoughts. I am giving it to God. Oh yeah, it's so perfect. And here's a song in the musical Les Mis, the lyrics by Herbert Kretzmer. It's when the bishop speaks to Jean Valjean. By the witness of the martyrs, by the passion and the blood, God has raised you out of darkness. I have bought your soul for God. And it's so true. It's so perfect. Yeah, it's one of the most memorable moments in all of literature. There's nothing like it. You want to hear that. It'll ring in your heart and resonate in your brain the rest of your life. It's perfect. Okay, and that's all I got on Victor Hugo. I hope you found that helpful.